We always, in our conference model, try to learn as much as possible about the place that we hold the conference. And so we continue that tradition this morning with a plenary that focuses on current challenges in the city of Miami and the greater South Florida region. And the moderator for the panel is our intrepid local host committee chair, Nicole Ruggiano. I will turn it over to Nicole.
Good morning. Welcome all of you to Miami. I know this is the first year that UAA has actually held their conference here. So the local host committee has decided that to best learn about our city, that we would organize a plenary session titled Miami, Local Challenges to a Global Future. And to touch on this topic, we have three wonderful speakers today to cover the economic context of this theme, the social/political context of this theme, and also the issues of sea level rise and urban planning. Our first speaker today is Desmond Alafohi. He is the International Trade Coordinator and head of the International Trade Promotion Unit for Miami-Dade County's Economic Development and International Trade Agency. He has received several awards for his distinguished service and has authored numerous articles cited in international communications, local newspapers, and association journals. The second speaker today will be Jan Nijman. He's presently the director and professor of the Center for Urban Studies at the University of Amsterdam and was previously a professor at the University of Miami. He has also authored the book Miami, Mistress of the Americas. And our final speaker today is Elizabeth Platter-Zyberk, and she is a partner from the firm Duane Platter-Zyberk and Company, and for 18 years served as the dean of University of Miami School of Architecture. She's also co-founder of the Congress for the New Urbanism. And so we will start with our first speaker today.
Okay, where is your mouth? Good morning. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning. I was speaking to the executive director last night and realized that this is actually your first time of coming to Miami, Florida. We want to make sure that you come to Miami, 3 or 4 times in a decade. So we're happy to have you in Miami, and thank you for inviting me to join you for UAA's conference. As we all know, economic development is the sustained, concerted actions of policymakers and communities that promote the standard of living and economic health of a specific area. Economic development can also be referred to as the quantitative and qualitative changes in the economy, and this involves critical infrastructure, health, human capital, literary, regional competitiveness, safety, social inclusions, and other initiatives. At the local level, the purpose of local economic development, or LED as we like to refer to it, is to build up the economic capacity of the local area to improve its economic future and the quality of life for all. It is a process by which the public, business, and non-governmental sector partner collectively to create a better working conditions for economic growth and employment generation, according to the World Bank. So because most of you are in Miami for the very first time, I'd like to bring you back memory lane. History has it that Miami is actually the only city that was founded by a woman, and her name is Julia Turtle. She moved to Miami in 1891 and purchased her home close to where you were last night. What is incredible about this woman is the great foresight that she had in building up Miami, convincing Mr. Flagler to extend the railroad from North Florida into Miami. And she actually had a vision that someday Miami will be the center of trade with Latin America and the gateway of the Americas. Well, by 1896, 344 residents gathered together to register Miami as a city, and most of them were actually black laborers from the Bahamas, and so Miami as a city was born. By 1910, Miami's population was just 5,500, and by 1920 had soared to 30,000. By the late 30s, Miami had attained a population of 100,000. So today, fast forward, Miami-Dade County has a population of 2.5 million residents. It's the 8th most diverse community in the entire United States. Our economic development drivers include the Miami International Airport that had a record 41 million passengers last year. Our visitors, our Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau recorded 14.2 million visitors last year as well. And if you had the time, I know Madam Executive Director will be mad at me, but please make sure you do this after the convention. Make sure you go on our cruise, on any of our cruises to the Caribbean or Latin America. We are known as the cruise capital of the world, and almost reaching now 5 million passengers per year. So those are basically some of the economic engines that makes South Florida what it is. Of the 381 metropolitan statistical areas, Miami is the 8th largest MSA in the US. Our region now boasts about 5.8 million. And for international trade, you can see that we have a very robust international trade, global trade. We hit a record 124 billion of global trade in 2012. It's beginning to dip a little, but the numbers I have seen this year indicate that we will again reach greater trade with in 2014. So the dream of Julia Turtle as Miami being the gateway has been realized in just a century. We are, of course, now the undisputed gateway of the Americas. Every year, once every decade, the community gets together. This year, again, it was championed. Last year, it was championed by the Beacon Council to look at how we can continue to sustain our economic development effort. And the targeted industries, 7 of them are up there, and we are also investing in education as well. Our challenges, as with any of the large MSAs, is transportation, and our leaders are already addressing this. We're obviously not happy that Miami, according to the recent GPS maker, TomTom's report, Miami is the 7th, has the 7th worst traffic congestion of amongst the major US cities and 66 of 200 major cities around the world. So transportation poses a huge economic challenge for us. Also, brain drain is something that we are very concerned about because it seems that our young ones graduate from college and seem to go further north to greener pastures. So we're working as well. We have grassroots effort to reverse that trend because we know that we cannot train our young ones and then have them leave. So I again thank UAA for inviting me and look forward to your comments and questions as we move forward. Madam Nicole, thank you.
Good morning and welcome to Miami. So my name is Jan Nijman. I've lived in Miami for about 20 years, until about 3 years ago. I lived here permanently during that time, and I'm a temporary inhabitant of the city at the moment. So I moved between Amsterdam and Miami at this time. The theme of the conference is global local connections. And there's a lot of things that we could talk about, and some very interesting things being covered just now, and later, I'm sure, when it comes to climate change. And of all the different issues, I wanted to focus for the few minutes that I have, for these 10 minutes that I have, on the notion of transience in Miami and what it means to this city. And it's a follow-up, really, to a book that I published about 4 years ago, called Miami, Mistress of the Americas, in which transience is very much the central issue. Transience, I've argued in the book, and I would argue today, is the genius loci of Miami. It's the defining characteristic of this city, has always been. You can think of Miami, and it's been very often presented in this way, that it is a Latin city, it is a Cuban city, and so on, and in some ways this is so. But it is more important in a way. It's not so much that the people that have come here are predominantly Latins, which they weren't always, and they certainly, not all of them are, and certainly not all of them are Cubans. The key issue is, I would argue, that you have this enormous turnover all of the time, and this idea of mobility or hypermobility that affects this locale the way it does, of course, is very much a function of globalization. And so this is where these two, the global and the local, very much come together in my mind. This is a graphic visualizing sort of the place of Miami as a router of population movement in the area. And this is the numbers, I'm not sure if you can see it from where you are, I can't. But it's over a 5-year period, and they are hundreds of thousands of people every 5 years, based on US Census data, that come to Miami from abroad, hundreds of thousands of people that come to Miami from the rest of the United States, and hundreds of thousands that leave. So it's a constant movement of population, very extremely so. Compared to other cities. And this has always been so. So it's quite important to remember, and we heard it just now in the previous presentation, that Miami is a very recent city, that until the turn of the previous century, there was no city. It was a very, very small town. But it has always been, since it emerged, a highly transient place. And it's not just a matter of lots of population movement. It has always been a matter of many of the people that have come to Miami, that are highly mobile, are very affluent and very wealthy. And it gives a particular twist to the story of transience in Miami. And I thought I'd throw in this slide of the Royal Palm Hotel, which used to be exactly where we are now. So we are on the waterfront, we're on the mouth of the Miami River, around the turn of the century, this Royal Palm Hotel that was built by Flagler, the railroad magnate. It was the first luxury hotel in South Florida. It had electricity. It had no air conditioning, but it had fans. It had a pool. And it was meant, and it was marketed to the elite of the United States. The Vanderbilts, the Cargills, and so on. They would come down to Miami to spend some time and leave again. And they would also buy up property in Miami and spend some time there during the year. Before there was air conditioning, all of this was seasonal. Interesting detail here is that Henry Flagler, who built this hotel and owned it, is in the, say, sort of the old history books of Miami, portrayed as the father of Miami. He didn't live here. This was his second home. And it's very typical of the way Miami functioned, that the people who often made the decisions, and certainly the people who had the affluence in this area, didn't spend most of their time here. So I tried to create an index of transience. So I included a number of variables in this index to determine how Miami compared to other metropolitan areas in the United States, and included several variables in the index. And after considerable data manipulation, I was able to get Miami to the top of that list. No, actually, it wasn't that hard. Some very simple variables that were included, like the number of people coming in, the number of people living, the number of people that have lived there for the last 5 years, and so on, that you can readily get from the census. And so the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area ranks first in the United States among the 50 or so biggest metropolitan areas. Las Vegas is second, which is an interesting comparison, but the Las Vegas transience is very much a matter of domestic transience, whereas in Miami it is very much, not entirely, but very much also a matter of foreign or international transience. As I said, it's not just hypermobility that defines Miami. It is also that a relatively large number of people that come and go are highly affluent. And so, for example, if you were to compare Miami and Los Angeles in terms of its Latin population, it's a very different story here from LA. The number of people with higher incomes of Latin migrants is much higher in Miami, for example, than it is in Los Angeles. It's a very different type of mobility. And what I did here is I looked at the records of the appraiser's office, property taxes, where, of course, you get here, as elsewhere in the US, I think you get an exemption if you're a homesteader. So if this is your primary residence, you get an exemption, I think, of $50,000 on your property taxes. And so it's a very easy way to look at this kind of mobility and people who have second homes in Miami. And if you look at this map, the dark red on the map is where more than 60% of all the homes are second homes, not primary residences. And of course, what is very striking then when you look at that map is that most of these are on the waterfront. This is all prime real estate. And this was around 2010, maybe it was 2009, I don't remember exactly. But this has probably intensified further. And it raises questions when you realize that most of the people who own prime real estate are at least half of the time not here, often even more so than that. And I've sometimes thought of this as people living in this wonderful real estate on the waterfront, enjoying the ocean breezes and the great weather and everything, towards the water and with their backs to the city, in a way, and they come and go, check in and check out as if the city were a hotel, if you will. Now, the interesting thing is that, so Miami is extreme in some ways, Miami is exceptional, but it does constitute a sort of a laboratory. It sets things in very sharp relief, because what has been happening, I would argue, in Miami for many, many years is now increasingly happening elsewhere. And I just want to give you a very quick round of some of a phenomenon that's been in the news a lot lately, and so this does not refer to Miami. This is from a couple of different news sources from this last year. This is from The Guardian, talking about London, and the photo that it shows is a international property fair in Moscow, showing a model of central London, and we've all been able to read about Russians buying up real estate in central London at a breakneck pace, and it's all upper-end real estate. This is from the Globe and Mail, the Canadian newspaper, and it talks about Vancouver, and it reports that one of the biggest high-end real estate companies disclosed that about a third of the deals that they have made in the past year went to people from China. So Chinese buying up Vancouver, Chinese buying up Seattle. This is the New York Times Magazine from February of this year, and it had a very interesting article, stream of foreign wealth flows to elite New York real estate. And then there's a little underscored subtitle, if you can see it from there. It says Towers of Secrecy. And it really goes to the question that so much of this real estate is bought up with shady money. Well, Miami has decades of experience on that front as well, particularly, of course, after the 1970s, when a lot of the cocaine money was plowed back into real estate in this city. The book talks about that as well. And this one on Paris, and the same thing is happening there. And I can tell you the same thing is also happening even in Amsterdam, which is a tiny city in all of this, and a city with lots of social housing compared to these other places. But in the private sector, it's being bought up very, very quickly. This is from, and I'm finishing it up here. This is from Knight Frank Real Estate Company, and they came out with a nice brochure that was about the ultra, what does it say? The ultra high net wealth individuals or something like that in the world, and where they are in the places they prefer. And you are ultra high net worth if your net worth is more than 30 million. And Miami ranks, I think it's 6th or 7th on this listing. So 6th, and the question really here that I would put forward here as a matter of discussion is that, there may be places, surely there are places also in the US, take Detroit, for example, they would wish they had this kind of investment coming in. But it can also be a double-edged sword, and if it goes into the extreme, and in the global era that we live in, it can go to that extreme, foreign ownership isn't necessarily a problem, but absentee ownership can be, and it can be a mixed blessing of sorts. And certainly in the book, I talk a lot about the social ramifications of this kind of social fabric that it creates. Thank you.
Thank you. So from the facts to some unpredictability. This is, by the way, your conference looks wonderful. I'm in great admiration of all the topics that have been pulled together and all the wonderful people that are here, and I wish I could spend the rest of the time with you. And I'm also impressed by your website that you can actually make a calendar electronically out of the conference. So the prior two speakers talked about the economy, society. It's up to me to talk about the environment. Miami, local challenges to a global future. I'm going to talk about some things that I think, although they won't be the same anywhere else, certainly affect all cities. That global climate future provides a different condition in every city to adapt to. Adaptation is regional. We all need to be mitigating and trying to reduce emissions. We could still have a good effect for 30 years from now if we did the right things now. But most of us really need to contend with adapting, whether it's a changing water supply, increased heat, drought, and so on. But I need to start out by saying that I am not a transient. My own involvement here in Miami dates back 40 years, and I'm here to stay and try to give our city a future. So unlike some of the others, and I'm not the ultra wealthy either, but they are an interesting component in our city because they actually bring a lot of things that the rest of us who live here enjoy. So I first came to Miami in the 1970s, and I have had an academic, professional, and civic engagement over the years, which has ranged from, for many years at first, promoting the vision of an urban future for what was then a suburban, auto-dependent 20th century settlement. Much of the region is still that way, but the city that you're in right now has indeed taken on an urban character, and it may not be as beautiful to walk around here as you might imagine it could be in the future, but it's working on that. And in fact, I would suggest that at some point you leave the conference, don't wait till the end, walk out the front door, turn right to the water, and then turn right again to walk along part of a not yet complete waterfront promenade that will one day be 7 miles along the bay and 5 miles up and down the river. So we got that going, and my involvement continued to the writing of a new zoning code for the city, for Miami, not the whole region. It's a form-based code. It's called Miami 21. It came out of my work in the new urbanism, and the goal was to indeed make that walking environment, the public realm, a more amenable and valuable place. That's underway. In other words, the code exists, it's being used. I could point to some improvements, I think, as a result. And so those of us who've been addressing the city as a place of urbanism have now turned to its uncertain future, which is related to climate change and, as Nicole said, sea level rise. I'd be happy to talk about that history, the 30 to 40 year evolution during questions and answers, but my comments now will focus on this future, which has been documented in the Rolling Stone magazine article of 2 years ago, National Geographic. Probably many of you have seen these, so I'm not going into the details of it, and I'm sure I'm not going to show you pictures of sea level rise. I should add that this is a topic that's of exchange among the local universities. So FAU, FIU, we all talk to each other about the work we're doing on it. Marilis Nepomechi from Nicole's university just put on a beautiful exhibit about climate change for South Florida, which was at the Coral Gables Museum. And we have something called the 4-County Climate Compact, which is a gathering of government agencies from the 4 counties of South Florida to address this in concert. While there's a lot of doom and gloom out there, and as well as questions about the science, there are people who are addressing this. It's probably fair to say that whereas the 20th century decades of South Florida development saw the natural environment as something to be overcome, we drained, channeled, developed air conditioning. In effect, we were fighting the environment. We've crossed a threshold in the last decade in which many of us, if not all, perceive the natural environment to be something that needs to be sustained. Indeed, the very land, the earth that we're sitting on, this very part of the city, needs to be defended, not only from the environmental degradation of increasing development, but it needs to be defended from the effects of climate change, especially rising seas. This is not just a coastal issue. Yes, storm surges are a threat, an obvious danger, but more insidious is the rising underground water table that is expected to impede drainage produce frequent and more severe flooding, and ultimately decrease the habitability of inland areas. You may not know that we are sitting on a porous limestone a porous lime rock basis here, a substrate that allows water to flow through it. The early settlers from those early years that you heard about in the first talk used to gather their drinking water, which bubbled up in the salt water of Biscayne Bay. And so the hydrology of the area brings fresh water underground through to the ocean. But now, because of changes in development and the hydrology of the sea, salt water is pushing back through that substrata, and our drinking water supply is at risk. So that's probably one of the big challenges. The second one is that habitable landmass is expected to shrink. And we might have three reactions in how to deal with that, aside from do nothing. And those three are defend, adapt, and retreat. Defend is obvious. We try to protect it, maybe raise the land to be able to stay in places where it will be difficult. Adapt is learn to live with the water. Retreat is obvious. You go away. So the decisions regarding which action to take are related to geography and economy. The geography is where are you, or where is the place that you're concerned with, and at what elevation. We do go up to, I think, about plus 25 in various parts of the region. But some of the streets down here are at plus 3, which doesn't give you a lot of freeboard. The economy is identifying the value to the economy of the place that you're concerned with. Places of high investment or regional influence are likely to be thought of as worthy of defense, but we will have to set aside other places. So infrastructure, certain institutions, and places of great economic impact like downtown and Brickell or the beaches probably will be considered valuable enough to work on. This relationship of geography and economy is sometimes counterintuitive. The most threatened areas, the islands and this mainland coast, represent the economic drivers of our region: trade, banking, tourism, as you heard. We will defend these. But the western low-density areas closest to the rising waters of the Everglades make the most sense to eventually abandon. The political prospects of such decision-making are daunting. Thank you. That is our local challenge: how to make wise decisions at the scale of the region. I believe we can do this. I have identified a transect of 8 geographic locations that can be scenarioed according to their investment types. One might look to the Resilient New York plan that was developed by the Bloomberg administration after Hurricane Sandy as a kind of model for this kind of planning. Some vexing concerns remain. We need to pay special attention to things like how to finance the end game for property ownership. Nobody's publicly talking about retreat or abandonment yet. But we do need to worry about something that doesn't exist anywhere. When it's time to leave and clean up, who pays for it? Scientists are enabling us to see the future. Unlike Rust Belt cities, we do not need to be surprised by the change coming. We do not need to be Detroit, but we do need to plan for the change, to determine how to allocate resources to ensure a healthy economy and society for the decades to come. Thank you.
Okay, and so now we actually have time that we can open up for questions for our panelists.
So transportation clearly was identified as one of our big challenges, and I do think there are things that we have to work on. We are actually transit-rich downtown. Although it's difficult to navigate, that can be worked out. The infrastructure is here and has been paid for at another time, and it's off the ground. It's raised up. So yes, there are definitely things we have to work on, and I'm sure the Economic Development Director of the county will report your experience back to the Transit Authority.
And I actually don't think that that experience is uncommon. I think that there are a lot of people who would like to use or rely more on public transit, especially since Desmond clearly explained how difficult it is to navigate traffic here in Miami. But I think that it's a barrier. Even when I moved here in 2009, thinking I'm moving to a big city, that I could start taking transit to FIU, and I think I would have had to have 3 interchanges on the bus, and the ride that usually takes me a 30-minute drive would have taken me over 3 hours, and so it is a barrier for people to use it. Yes.
On our neighborhood tour yesterday, we heard that poverty rate in Miami is at 30%. I didn't hear anything about the initiatives to address poverty. We heard John a lot about rich people. What's going on in terms of development? I know this is a question, but it just struck me that nobody really addressed the issues of poverty here. It's nice to hear something about it.
That's true. Okay.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So basically, he was saying that he learned that poverty in Miami-Dade is very high. It's over 30%, but it wasn't addressed today by the panelists, and so he's just asking about what types of interventions or initiatives have there been to address poverty.
Yeah, thank you very much. Obviously, with a 10-minute limit, we cannot address all the issues. I think about 2 years ago, Congresswoman Frederica Wilson was horrified to hear that her congressional district was one of the poorest in the nation. And so our leaders got together, and in fact, our mayor, the Honorable Carlos Jimenez, has a program that he's working on that will help alleviate the issue of poverty. So one thing about Miami is that we have a very robust leadership that all come together to attack issues at the local and regional level. So these are some of the, I know that there are already initiatives on the table. There are also legislation at the local level to make sure that some of the big projects have set asides for the local communities to participate in those jobs. So a lot of initiatives are on the table, and this is a top priority for our mayor as well.
Just to add to that, I would argue that, well, certainly Miami is a very unequal city, and there is serious poverty in Miami. When you ask about planning, and I would argue, and maybe I would charge a little bit here, is that Miami has been described by another colleague at the University of Miami as a city without a memory, which is based on this notion of transience. Now, I would argue if a city doesn't have a memory, it may also not have much of a planned future. When it comes to dealing with issues of poverty, it is not a very visible item on the agenda, I would argue. It is not. When it comes to matters of, I would argue, if only for the sake of debate, when it comes to planning for climate change, it is a reflection of this intense transience that we do not plan for that. There has for years not been any planning. We're maybe 6 foot below us is the water table from the ground down, and yet there is no planning for that. There has been a great deal of planning trying to re-engineer the Everglades, to make space for urbanization. It has been, of course, a royal mess, and they're trying to fix it, which is extremely difficult because you're in a wetland here, which just makes it very difficult to maintain. But planning for climate change, I would suggest there has been very, very little of that, and I may be a little bit biased because of the other place where I live, where this has been part and parcel of the consciousness all the time. On transportation, if I may just add, when the person said train, maybe they just didn't speak English when you asked that, but more seriously, transportation is quite good, actually, in Miami, but it's compared to, say, New York City, not everybody uses it. So it's very much class biased as to who uses, particularly the buses in Miami. And it's striking when you get on a bus how noticeable that is. And that, too, I think, is a reflection of the kind of class structure that is prevalent in Miami. Oh, okay. Okay, very well. Yeah.
And I also like to say that there are a lot of private sector initiatives in relationship to issues of poverty locally. And on Saturday, there's going to be 2 local organizations who have organized tours. So the tour on homelessness is going to be organized and led by Camilla's House, which is one of the largest providers for people who are homeless here in Miami. And then also the Haitian American Community Development Corporation is organizing a tour of Little Haiti as well.
So it's an interesting discussion because poverty doesn't come by itself. Part of the reason that there are disparities in the city is because one of its main economic bases is tourism, and that's essentially a service economy. So we used to, when I first came to Miami, the GDP was based on entitlements. And this has changed. I'm going to tell you how it's changed over time. So Social Security and welfare were the largest ingress in the city in the 70s. It eventually became tourism, which is still a very important part of our basis. But before the last recession, it became the white-collar work of trade, banking, and other kinds of professional services. So it's evolving over time, and I think that's part of the history of the city is that it's constantly remaking itself and evolving. A short time ago, it was a small town, and probably that, and just by who the founders were, you can begin to see how what its foundation was like, that hotel. And so it is trying to remake itself. There are all sorts of efforts currently for entrepreneurial work, incubation of technology, supporting the high tech, supporting the universities, and so on. And so I think that issue, that disparity, which I think the Chamber of Commerce recognizes that transportation and the income disparity are among our greatest challenges to deal with, really come tied with the kind of work that goes on. And there are lots of, I think, more positive, invisible things, which is this is a landing place for a lot of people who are maybe in poverty to begin with, but spawn generations of people who become educated, maybe leave the city, as you say, but it's a kind of, it's a very dynamic picture, I guess, one must acknowledge.
Yes. Could you be a little louder, please?
I have a question about one of the things you talked about around the super rich. I live in London, and the discourse in the media all the time is obviously about the very troubling things happening in property prices.
if I got the question correctly, is that there's often a dialogue that the super rich are buying up a lot of property, and so, but it's often a racialized conversation. And to what extent is that an issue here in Miami-Dade?
That's a very interesting question, I think. I think certainly if you would take the case of London, the way once people become resentful of very wealthy people, helicoptering into their city and buying up the most expensive real estate, it can take turns towards prejudice and elements of ethnicity may come in and that sort of thing. And I think that's the case. That is happening. I think in the case of London and with Russians, there is some of that. It's very difficult to put your finger on it, but I think I would agree with you that some of it is there. When it comes to Vancouver or Seattle, for example, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. But this is very much also, I have to confess, an intuitive thing. In Miami, I don't think that is an issue. In fact, I think in Miami, I would argue, this has been such an integral part of this city for so long. There is what you would need in order to get the kind of a discourse that you are referring to. You need sort of a majority that is local, that is going to generate that discourse. Majority that doesn't exist in Miami. It doesn't exist in Miami. There is no majority. The single largest ethnic group in Miami are Cubans. And they now maybe in Miami-Dade and Broward, what are they, maybe 700,000 or so. So not nearly a majority. So who's going to generate the discourse about whom? I don't know. It very much falls apart into more different ethnicities. There has been talk in Miami also about Russians buying real estate, but also about Europeans coming in and buying real estate. Of course, there have been Latins. And one decade it can be Venezuelans, then it can be another particular nationality. But certainly also there are many people from the US or Canada or other places that come to Miami. Maybe you have another idea about this, but I don't think there is that kind of sensitivity in Miami.
Following up with what the last speaker is saying, I think if you understand the history, and he's very, very right, if you understand the history of Miami, you will see that there's absolutely no bias. Understand that 51% of the residents of Miami are foreign born. 51%. 65% of our population is basically Hispanic. The mayor of the city of Miami and the mayor of Miami-Dade County are both Hispanic. The chairman of the board of county commissioners, the first Haitian American to be elected as the chair of our board. Our number one trade partner is Brazil. Most of our number one tourism partner as well is Brazil. So when you see the dynamics of our population, as he rightly said about transients, you will recognize that, in fact, when we take trade missions abroad, we openly solicit businesses from our partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. So for us, it is normal that Brazilians, Argentinians, Venezuelans will obviously look to Miami to come and buy homes.
And I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, my question is, with all of this transience at the level of ordinary people, combined with the property ownership by out-of-towners, as you say, helicopter in and out, I'm wondering what kind of political mobilization is possible when you
violence and also income inequality? To what extent is political mobilization of certain groups difficult here in our local area?
I think that's a big challenge in Miami, you know, and there are two sides to it, I would say. First, you know, it's important, I think when you make that observation and you make that argument, to acknowledge that, of course, there are in Miami plenty of people who have been here a long time, who might be here forever, for as long as they live, and that make great efforts in mobilizing public opinion and getting things done and changing, you know, the way we build this city and so on. But they are a small minority. I once did a little study of demonstrations, political demonstrations that have taken place on the streets in Miami, political demonstrations, if you talk about political mobilization. And the only big demonstrations that would ever happen in Miami are about Cuba or about Haiti or things like that. So it's not about Miami. And I think that's a big marker of what is going on, even at the time, maybe, I'm not sure exactly how long ago this is, but when it was about immigration issues and rights of immigrants and illegal immigrants and so on, the number of people that went on the streets of Miami was minuscule compared to other cities in the United States. So it's a big challenge. But it's also, you know, on the flip side, when just now we point out that, well, there is no majority in Miami, and there aren't these kinds of, you know, xenophobic types of discourses being generated in this city. I think that underscores that you have an incredible opportunity in this city to create the kind of cosmopolitanism that we all, I think, want in this world. There's nothing wrong with a great deal of mobility. There's nothing wrong with transience, as long as it comes with the civility and citizenship that people owe to a place. And you know, I think the jury is out on that. I don't think Miami has done that well in that regard, to face that challenge. But certainly things are happening, and I think there could be, Miami could be a beacon when it comes to that.
And we're pretty much out of time for today. I want to thank everybody. Particularly, I want to thank our plenary speakers for coming and sharing their expertise with us today and allowing us all to learn a little bit more about the local area.